Beneath the quiet streets of a forgotten American town lies a darkness older than time itself. When a stranger arrives, desperate to unravel a chilling mystery, the fragile veil between reality and nightmare begins to tear. Haunting secrets, sinister rituals, and restless spirits awaken, dragging everyone into a battle for survival against an unrelenting evil. But beware. Some truths come with a price too terrible to pay. Are you ready to face the terror lurking just beyond the shadows? The snow was red that morning, like the earth itself was bleeding. The first time Adam saw the house, it was crouched behind a wall of pine trees like a wounded animal, silent, angular, and almost ashamed of its presence. The place wasn't even marked on his GPS. He had driven past the last gas station over 40 minutes ago and hadn't seen another soul since. Just the endless trees, the howling winter wind, and now this, the crumbling farmhouse with boarded-up windows and a keep-out sign so faded it looked like it was trying to whisper rather than warn. The assignment was simple. At least, that's what the editors at the Appalachian Folklore Review claimed. Old story, rural paranoia, some mass delusion back in the 90s. You're the science guy, debunk it. But standing there in the cold, watching his breath form little clouds against the blue-white morning, Adam felt the kind of unease that didn't come from superstition or irrational fear. It came from something deeper, something ancestral. He stepped out of the truck, boots crunching on the frostbitten dirt, and stared at the rusted mailbox. Dunlow, it read. Just one name, no number, no street, just a name. Of course, Adam muttered, pulling his coat tighter. Nothing creepy about that. The air had a strange weight to it, thick, like the moment before a storm. He'd read about this area before he came. Dunlow County, population now unofficially 0. Locals called it hollow country because of how sound didn't travel here, how it always felt like something was listening, waiting, crouching beneath the silence. Adam made his way to the porch, the boards groaning under his steps like a tired old man shifting in his sleep. He tried the front door, locked. A quick glance around revealed a side window, half-mashed, the jagged glass teeth grinning at him through the ivy. He sighed. Professional journalism at its finest, he muttered, and slid in. The inside smelled of mold, old newspapers, and something more acrid, metallic. It didn't smell like a place abandoned for decades. It smelled recent, like someone had been here. Or something. The floor was littered with signs of forgotten life. A child's doll with one eye missing, stacks of yellowed newspapers about local harvest festivals, and a large crucifix on the wall, turned upside down. Adam stared at it, not out of fear, but curiosity. "Not very Baptist of you," he whispered to the empty room. He started recording notes into his phone. January 11th, 9:17 a.m. Site arrival confirmed. Dunlow House appears structurally intact despite state records claiming it burned down in 1997. Entered via a side window, evidence of previous entries suggests I'm not the first. As he turned into the main hallway, he noticed the wallpaper was peeling back in strips, revealing words scrawled beneath it. Not paint, not ink, blood. Old, brown, flaked, but unmistakably blood. One word repeated over and over in crude, frantic letters. Wake. Adam froze. In all his years chasing pseudoscience, from Appalachian cryptids to Ozark cult rumors, he'd never seen something quite so theatrical. This wasn't for show. This wasn't made for tourists or bored teens with a Ouija board. This was personal. He followed the hallway to what must have been the living room. A large fireplace dominated the far wall, charred black at the edges. Above it, etched into the stone, was a symbol, almost like a tree with veins instead of branches, roots twisting upward into eyes. Adam took a picture, then another. Something about the design itched at his brain. He'd seen it before. No, not seen, dreamed. He was about to turn away when he heard it. A knock. Not loud, not hurried, just one knock. He spun, phone light slicing across the room. Nothing. Then, again. this time from the ceiling. Knock! He aimed his phone upward. The beam of light landed on an attic hatch, half open. His gut twisted. He wasn't alone. Hello? He called, because even trained skepticism has boundaries. No answer. Another knock, this time from behind him. Adam turned again. The living room now seemed darker, like the shadows had deepened, grown teeth. He backed into the hallway, pulse rising, phone clutched tightly in one hand, other reaching for the small flask of pepper spray he kept in his jacket. His logic screamed at him. Old pipes, creaking beams, wind tunnels, nothing supernatural. But his body remembered the blood and the symbol, and the way his breath had turned red on the porch. He stepped outside, the cold air biting his face like punishment. He needed a break, a reset. Something felt wrong, not just in the house, but in the woods around it. The trees were too quiet. That's when he saw the footprints, not his. Larger, barefoot, and fresh, leading from the edge of the trees directly to the porch and then back again, as if someone or something had walked right up to the house and then disappeared. He checked his phone, no signal. Of course, he reached for his camera bag. It was gone. Shit, he breathed, spinning in place. No way! He retraced his steps, scanning the ground, the porch, back inside the window. Gone. Everything was gone. The camera bag, the field recorder, the samples he'd taken from the wall. Only his phone remained in his pocket, and even it was flickering. Then, from the woods came the voice. Soft, like static. Adam? He froze. It sounded like his sister, but Mary had died 3 years ago. Another whisper, closer this time. Wake up. He stumbled back, trying to shake off the fog settling over his mind. His fingers went numb, his vision blurred at the edges, and in the tree line something moved. A shape. Tall, gaunt, head tilted in unnatural curiosity. Then it was gone. Adam didn't run. Couldn't. His legs refused to obey. He leaned against the truck, breathing hard, trying to ground himself in reason. Just a hallucination. He hadn't slept well. The stress, the isolation. But then he noticed something etched into the side of his vehicle. The same tree vein symbol. And beneath it, carved with something sharp. Day 1. The rain had picked up again. A steady drumming on the roof of the truck as Nathan pulled up to the decaying farmhouse. Its silhouette loomed against the dusky horizon, all rotted shingles and broken windows. The chimney was crumbling. A swing hung from the front porch, slowly creaking in the wind like it still remembered the children who once played there. Leah climbed out silently, hugging her jacket tighter against the biting air. She followed Nathan as he made his way up the sagging steps, boots creaking loudly on the wood. I told you it was real, Nathan muttered, shining his flashlight at a half-buried sign beside the porch. The letters, though faded, were unmistakable now. Hazel Ridge House, Est, 1851. Leah traced the name with her fingers. The name had haunted her for years, buried in her mother's journal under scribbled warnings and blackout lines. Now it stood before her, not a myth or hallucination, a place lost to time, a place her mother had once written. Some doors are better left unopened. Nathan forced the front door open with a grunt. The hinges groaned like an animal in pain. The stench hit them instantly. Wet wood, mildew, and something older, something sour. The interior was a decaying skeleton of a home. Peeling wallpaper clung like skin to damp walls, and furniture sat sunken into warped floorboards. Dust coated everything in a sepia film. What are we even looking for? Leah whispered. Her voice felt too loud here. Nathan shrugged. Proof? A clue? I don't know. But if this place really is tied to what happened in Grover Hollow, I want answers. He moved through the house like he'd been here before. Maybe he had, in dreams or nightmares. Leah trailed him through a narrow hall into the main parlor. It was strangely preserved. A circle of armchairs surrounded a cold fireplace. In the center, a rug was pushed aside to reveal a series of symbols carved into the floor, strange curling shapes that looked burned into the wood. That's not graffiti, Nathan murmured. No, Leah breathed, feeling the chill rising up her spine. That's ritual work. There was a sudden bang above them. They froze. A soft thud, then another. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing the floor above. Nathan clicked off his flashlight. No way there's anyone else out here. Leah's heart pounded in her throat. We have to see. No, Nathan said quickly. We don't have to do anything. We document this, then get out. But Leah was already climbing the stairs, flashlight gripped tight. The second floor smelled worse. Damp rot and something almost metallic. Dried blood? The hallway was long, the wallpaper peeling in long yellowed strips. There were framed photos on the walls, old, black and white images of stern-looking men and women. Their eyes were gouged out, every single one. Leah's light flickered as she reached the end of the hall, drawn to the only door slightly ajar. She pushed it open slowly. Inside was a nursery. The wallpaper was faded pink, covered in storks and stars. A crib stood in the center, draped in dusty lace, but it was what hung above the crib that made her stomach churn. Dozens of dolls, hand-stitched from burlap and bone, were suspended from the ceiling on twine, turning slowly. Their faces were crude, mouthless, eyes stitched with red thread. Nathan stepped in behind her, mouth slightly open. What the hell? There was a sudden clink. Leah turned. One of the dolls had fallen from the ceiling, landing upright at her feet. Her flashlight flickered again. Nope, Nathan said, backing out. This isn't worth it. Whatever this place is, it's wrong. Leah knelt and picked up the doll. A cold shock ran up her arm. Her vision blurred for a second, then snapped back. She saw something, just a flicker. A little girl screaming, being dragged down a hallway by someone tall and faceless. Then black. She dropped the doll, gasping. It's not just a house. No kidding. They stumbled downstairs, Nathan shaking. We need to go. This place isn't dead. It's waiting. But Leah stopped at the mantel over the fireplace. There was something tucked behind a loose stone. She pulled it free, a leather-bound book, brittle and blackened at the edges. The cover read simply, Marigold Thorn. Her mother's name before marriage. Leah's breath hitched. She opened it and the first page was scrawled in elegant script. If you are reading this, then you are mine, and mine must pay the price. The pages were filled with strange diagrams, ritual instructions, and detailed notes about bloodlines, lunar phases, and a thing referred to only as the binding. I think this was hers, Leah whispered. Nathan read over her shoulder. Then this place wasn't just some forgotten ghost story, it was real. And your mom knew everything. Leah turned another page. There was a sketch, a symbol identical to the one burned into the parlor floor. Beside it, a date, October 13, 1996. The day her mother disappeared for 3 days. The day everything changed. She was part of this. And if she was... Nathan's voice trembled. What does that make you? They stood frozen for a moment, thunder rumbling in the distance. Suddenly, the front door slammed shut. They rushed back into the parlor, but the door wouldn't budge. It was like it had fused into the frame. Try a window! Leah shouted. Nathan ran to one, punched through the dusty glass, but beyond it there was nothing. No rain, no trees, no truck, only darkness. Endless, seething darkness. Nathan backed away, pale as death. This isn't outside anymore. Then they heard it. From beneath the floorboards, a slow, rhythmic scratching, like something waking up. The lights in the room dimmed, though there were no bulbs, and from the shadows at the corner of the room, a voice slithered up Leah's spine. You opened it, finally. She spun, but saw nothing. Only the doll she dropped earlier, now sitting upright on the mantel, its head slowly turning to face her. In the stillness of morning, the air reeked of gasoline and something older, something sweet and rotting. The sun hadn't yet risen fully, and the fog around Ashwood Hollow clung like a living skin. Lucas waited on the porch, his jacket zipped high, a fresh scrape across his cheek from a bramble he hadn't seen coming. He had barely slept. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw her, Darla, standing by the well in her nightgown, hair matted, her voice echoing, "Don't let it speak." He didn't mention that to Annie. She'd gone quiet after the night in the attic, and though she didn't say it aloud, Lucas could see she hadn't dismissed the whispers. Not anymore. They left early, just as the light turned silver, driving west on County Road 7 toward Sycamore Hill. Annie had found an old paper tucked between the pages of a water-damaged Bible they retrieved from the locked drawer in Grandpa Virgil's bedroom. It wasn't much, a partial letter with dates and a name, Reverend Silas Grigsby, B. 1891, Christ's Hollow, and a short phrase in Latin, half crossed out, Votum sanguinis, a blood vow. "It's a place, I'm sure of it," Annie had said, "Christ's Hollow." Lucas kept his thoughts to himself. Something about that name made his gums itch. By mid-morning they reached what had once been a narrow gravel road, but was now barely more than a deer trail winding through thick. Lucas parked the truck by an old timber post carved with a sunburst, half eroded but still visible, a symbol they'd seen etched onto the back of the attic door. The woods beyond were silent. Not quiet, silent. No birds, no wind. Even their footsteps on the damp leaves seemed muted. Annie checked the coordinates again on her phone, frowning. "There's no signal, but if the elevation's right, Christ's Hollow should be just down this ravine." Lucas looked down the slope, thick with fallen logs and damp bracken. Or whatever's left of it. They descended carefully, their boots slipping on moss-slick rocks, and after nearly 20 minutes, the trees parted. There it was. Christ's Hollow wasn't a town. It was a clearing, almost circular, ringed by a low stone wall barely 3 feet high. At its center stood a half-collapsed chapel of dark, warped timber, the roof caved in, steeple leading like a broken tooth. Around it were the remnants of a graveyard, iron crosses, half-buried stones, and bone-white stakes with rusted nails driven into them. Lucas stepped over the wall and froze. He didn't know why, but his chest went tight, like walking through that invisible ring had changed something, as if the air was different. The scent was stronger here, sweet, sickly. Annie moved past him, taking photos with her old Nikon. "This place is older than 1891. Look at the stonework." "Maybe the Reverend rebuilt it," Lucas murmured, "or used it." They moved cautiously toward the chapel. Inside, the pews were scattered, some splintered, others blackened like they'd been charred. There were handprints on the walls, child-sized, smudged in what looked like soot or dried blood. At the front, where the altar would have been, there was only a pit, a perfectly round hole about 3 feet across, lined with stones and char marks. Lucas crouched beside it. "This is where the fire started, or where they ended it." "Ended what?" Annie asked, her voice hollow. He didn't answer. He didn't know. They scoured the rest of the clearing, finding the grave markers older than the Civil War. One cross bore the name Ebenezer Raleigh, 1832-1847. Another simply read, "Infant daughter," with no date. And behind the chapel, Annie found the door. Half buried in bramble, it was an old root cellar door made of iron and wood, sealed shut with 5 iron spikes. It wasn't rusted. The metal looked oddly fresh. Lucas stared. Someone didn't want this opened. "That symbol again," Annie whispered, pointing to a faded carving above the door frame. It wasn't the sunburst, it was a spiral, almost hypnotic, with jagged lines cutting through the center. Lucas stepped back. "We're not opening it." Annie's eyes flicked to his, sharp. "We have to!" Before he could protest, a branch cracked nearby, loud, close, deliberate. They turned as one, but the clearing was still empty. No wind, no movement. Then a chapel bell, long gone, no longer visible, rang once. Faint, like it had echoed through time rather than sound. They didn't speak, they just ran. Back up the slope, stumbling, branches slashing their arms and faces. The fog hadn't lifted. In fact, it had thickened, blinding. When they finally reached the truck, they slammed the doors shut, gasping. Lucas turned the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. "Did you hear it?" Annie asked, breath ragged. "That bell?" Lucas didn't reply. He was staring at the dashboard. There, tucked into the windshield wiper, was a folded paper. He reached out with trembling fingers, unfolded it. It was old, yellowed, in cursive ink. "Do not speak its name. Do not listen. If you hear the bell, it is already looking at you." There was no signature, just one word scribbled beneath in red: Grigsby. They drove in silence, each lost in thought. The woods faded behind them, but the feeling lingered like smoke in their lungs. At night, back in Ashwood Hollow, Annie reviewed the photos. Most were intact: trees, stones, carvings. But 3 were black. Not blank, not glitched, just pitch black. The filings read Christ Hollow _IMG _660, Christ Hollow _IMG _666, Christ Hollow _IMG _666, Christ Hollow _IMG _666, Christ Hollow _IMG _66, Christ Hollow _IMG _66, Christ Hollow _IMG _66. Her forgettable tattoo birthmark, in a circle around a sun. Then she heard the creak of the front porch. Soft, slow footsteps. The fog didn't lift for hours. By the time it did, their boots were soaked through, their hands numb, and their voices hoarse from calling. Miles and Jenna huddled beneath a collapsed wooden trellis near what looked like the remains of a tool shed, taking turns scanning the tree line. The scent of something metallic lingered in the air. Not blood, not quite, but close. "This doesn't make sense," Miles muttered, teeth chattering. "He was just ahead of us." Jenna didn't respond. She had stopped speaking nearly an hour ago. Her eyes darted around like a trapped animal, as if the silence itself carried a threat. When she finally did speak, her voice was low and brittle. "We shouldn't have split up," she said. They stayed under the trellis for another 20 minutes before deciding to head back toward the trailhead. But as they retraced their steps, the forest betrayed them. The markers they'd carved into the bark were gone. Even the deep print Jenna had left in a patch of mud where she'd slipped and cursed an hour earlier had vanished. "We're going in circles," she whispered. "The hill! We passed that exact hill." Miles exhaled hard through his nose, trying to push back the rising panic. "There's no hill on this side. We should be going downhill. This isn't..." A soft creak above them, not from the trees, from something heavier, something deliberate. They froze. Another creak, then a slow drag, like fabric scraping over old wood. Jenna turned, her face already drained of blood. "Run," she said. They took off through the brush, branches clawing at their faces, the undergrowth tearing at their legs. Something followed, silent except for the occasional groan, as if the woods themselves were protesting its movement. They didn't look back. Not until the ground disappeared from under them and they tumbled down a steep embankment, crashing hard at the bottom. They lay still for several moments. Above, the forest resumed its unnatural hush. "I twisted my ankle," Jenna groaned. She tried to sit up but winced. Miles checked her leg. Swollen, not broken. They'd need a splint. He removed his jacket, tore strips from the lining, and snapped 2 sturdy branches into place. As he wrapped her ankle, Jenna looked up at the gnarled trees encircling them. "Do you remember," she said, "what the guy at the gas station said?" Miles paused. "Which part?" "About the black pine swallowing things, people, even time." He didn't answer. His thoughts had been circling back to that same warning. "We should have listened," she said. They continued more slowly now, with Miles supporting Jenna as best he could. The woods changed subtly as they moved. Trees twisted more grotesquely, with bark that looked like scorched flesh. The undergrowth thinned, replaced by patches of ashen soil. The sun was hidden, but a strange dimness hung low, like dusk perpetually held its breath. Then they heard it. A voice, low, nauseous, whispered, then a few soft words, barely audible. Ashes to ashes. They crouched behind a fallen log. A man emerged into view, no more than 20 feet away. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a torn flannel shirt, his back turned as he leaned over what looked like a crude altar, wooden, rotting, carved with symbols neither of them recognized. "What is he doing?" Jenna whispered. The man tilted his head, sniffed the air like an animal, then turned slowly toward them. His face was hollow, not in the metaphorical sense. His eyes were black voids, his mouth wide open and lipless, revealing rows of small needle-like teeth spiraling inward like a drain. No tongue, no expression, just hunger. "Run," Jenna said again, even though her ankle throbbed. They ran. The forest shifted around them. Paths appeared where none had existed. Roots erupted from the soil like skeletal hands. And through it all, the whispering. Not the man, not anymore. This was something older, deeper, like the trees themselves were speaking. "Miles," Jenna cried. "We're being herded." He saw it too. The branches up ahead were arranged, funneling them toward a clearing. They pushed through and stumbled into a space that shouldn't exist. It was a perfectly round clearing, the soil blackened and barren, and at its center stood an old well, the stones moss-covered and slick. Ropes dangled from its rim, all frayed and rotted, as if they'd once held something, or someone. The air here was wrong, heavy, pulsing. Jenna clutched her side, breathing hard. "We shouldn't be here." A shadow passed across the clearing, though there were no clouds, no light source. Then something rose from the well. It didn't climb. It didn't levitate. It simply was there, occupying space where space had once been. It had no defined shape, only suggestions of limbs, eyes too many to count, all unblinking and glossy like wet stones. Miles reached for Jenna's hand, but she was already backing away, limping, nearly falling. "What is it?" she breathed. A voice answered, not from the creature but from the trees, a chorus of whispers. "The Bound One, Keeper of the Hollow." Miles turned to Jenna. "We have to break the circle." "What?" He pointed. Around the clearing were standing stones, 6 of them, each etched with a sigil. "It's a ritual site. That thing, whatever it is, it's bound by those. We break one, we give it a way out. But maybe we also escape." Jenna looked pale. "And if we're wrong, we die anyway," he said. "But maybe on our own terms." They split. Jenna limped toward one of the stones, gripping a thick branch. Miles found another and kicked at it with everything he had. The ground trembled. The creature at the center shrieked. Not a sound exactly, more a psychic rupture, like their thoughts had been peeled open. One stone cracked. A gust of air shot from the well. The ropes jerked. Then Jenna screamed. Miles spun. Something had emerged from behind her, not the void creature, but the man from before, hatless now, revealing a scalp branded with sigils. He held a knife made of bone. "No!" Miles sprinted toward them, but before he could reach her, the man whispered something into Jenna's ear, and she went still, not dead, not unconscious, just still, as if time around her had frozen. The man looked up, locking eyes with Miles. "You've broken the first seal," he said, "and now it begins." And just like that, the clearing vanished. The trees were gone, the well was gone. Miles stood alone on the edge of a highway, a single car rumbling by, oblivious. No Jenna, no clearing. Just a sign on the side of the road, weathered and cracked. "Welcome to Ashford County, Est, 1809. Below it, someone had spray painted, "Do not look for what's already found you." Under a sky smeared with storm-gray clouds, the chapel's bell rang on its own, 3 times, despite the rusted rope hanging limp and untouched. Marcus froze beneath the archway of the decrepit stone church, the air around him tinged with an unnatural stillness. The wind had ceased entirely, leaving only the mournful echoes of the final bell toll to reverberate through the twisted limbs of the trees surrounding the clearing. Something about this place, it didn't just feel abandoned, it felt deliberately forgotten. Behind him, Jessie emerged from the narrow trail, her boots crunching over brittle pine needles. Was that the bell? He didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the chapel's warped wooden door, which stood half open as if waiting for them. The structure itself looked older than the surrounding town, older than the land itself in a way that made the skin at the back of Marcus's neck crawl. Must have been the wind, he muttered, though they both knew that wasn't true. They stepped inside, boots muffled by layers of dust and centuries of decay. The chapel interior was dim, the light from outside barely penetrating the stained glass windows. Rows of pews stood crooked, their wood eaten away by rot and termites. A crucifix at the front sagged on one side, the figure of Christ barely recognizable beneath peeling paint. But what caught Marcus's eye wasn't the decay, it was the altar. Or rather, what lay beneath it. "Jess," he said softly, gesturing toward the partially lifted stone slab at the base of the dais. A crude gnarled chain had been looped through an iron ring embedded into the floor, as if sealing something underneath. Jessie knelt beside it. "This doesn't look like any burial vault I've seen. This looks like a trapdoor," Marcus finished. They didn't speak for a moment, just stared at it. The temperature in the chapel dropped suddenly, and both of them instinctively turned their collars against the cold. "I need to know what's down there," Marcus said. "Something about this place. It's connected to the symbols in the cabin. That circle of ash, the drawings, the names in the ledger." Jessie looked at him like he'd lost his mind, but after a long beat, she nodded. "We do this fast. Get in, take photos, get out." With both of them tugging on the iron ring, the slab shifted with a groan, revealing a narrow stairwell that spiraled into the earth. A thick stench rose from below, earth, mold, and something else that smelled like rust and rot. Marcus flicked on his flashlight. The beam pierced the darkness like a knife. "Ready?" "Not even remotely," Jessie said, but she followed. The stairs were slick and uneven, worn by time and who knew what else. The walls were lined with crumbling stone, strange carvings etched into the surface, some symbols Marcus recognized from his research, others unfamiliar and deeply wrong in shape and form. At the bottom, the air was heavier, damper. The tunnel opened into a small, crypt-like chamber with a vaulted ceiling and rows of niches filled with sealed urns and jars. Candles, long dead, had once been mounted in sconces, melted down into twisted wax stalactites. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it, a book. It was bound in what looked like dried sinew, the cover branded with a circle of thorns, and a shape resembling a human eye bleeding from the corners. Marcus approached slowly, every nerve in his body screaming. "This is it," he whispered. "This is the heart of it all." Jessie scanned the room. "I don't like this. It feels like we're being watched." As Marcus reached out to touch the book, the air shimmered, just slightly, like heat off asphalt, and the shadows in the corners deepened. His fingers brushed the surface and the room changed. The walls pulsed, as if alive. A sound, low and wet like whispering in mud, began to rise around them. Jessie stepped back, flashlight trembling in her hands. "It's waking up," Marcus said, voice hoarse. "What is?" He didn't have time to answer. A breeze cut through the chamber, extinguishing their lights, even the beam of the flashlight. Everything went black. Then something touched Marcus's hand, cold, wet, flesh. He yanked back, heart hammering. Fessy screamed. A dim red light flared from the symbols on the walls, casting the entire chamber into an otherworldly glow, and in the shadows, something began to move, wrong in shape, slithering between the crypt's pillars with too many joints, too many eyes. It was watching them. "Run!" Marcus shouted. They bolted up the stairs, scrambling, slipping. Marcus could hear it following. No footsteps, only a slithering drag and the low hum of inhuman breath behind them. They burst into the chapel, slammed the trapdoor shut, and Marcus shoved the altar back over it just as the wood beneath his feet thumped with a sickening, wet impact. Silence returned, but it was a silence filled with tension, with presence. They backed out of the chapel, breathing hard, not daring to speak until the tree lines swallowed the clearing again. Jesse finally broke the silence. "That wasn't a ghost." "No," Marcus said, shaking. "It was something older, something we were never meant to find." Jesse's phone vibrated in her pocket. She looked down and went pale. "What?" Marcus asked. She turned the screen toward him. It was a photo, a grainy, low-light shot taken inside the chapel, of Marcus standing alone beside the altar. Except in the photo, something stood behind him, something tall, robed in darkness, its hands just inches from his neck, its face completely featureless except for a bleeding eye in the center of its forehead. They hadn't taken any photos. Jesse's phone vibrated again. This time the screen displayed a countdown, 0:04 and 59 seconds, 0:04 and 58 seconds. Marcus looked at her, throat dry. "What is that?" Jesse's voice cracked. "I think it's how long we have left." The library's back door creaked open as Noah stepped into the chill night. The air smelled faintly of moss and old paper, a scent that clung to the crevices of the town like mildew on stone. The silence outside was complete. No crickets, no wind, just the soft scuff of his sneakers on gravel. Clara followed closely behind, her breath visible in the frigid air. "What do you think it means?" she asked, clutching the photocopy of the illustration Noah had found, a grotesque rendering of the same sigil they'd seen etched into Angela's basement floor, framed by ritualistic symbols and an ominous phrase written in Latin. "Dormientes non tangere." "Do not disturb the sleepers," Noah translated aloud. "It's not just a warning, it's a command." They turned the corner past the shuttered diner and onto Main Street. Lights flickered inside Cassidy's pharmacy, though the closed sign hung crookedly in the window. Noah hesitated, staring at the reflection of himself and Clara in the glass. For a moment, his reflection didn't move in sync, just a fraction off, a blink too late. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes. Normal again. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice low. Clara looked confused. "See what?" He shook his head. "Never mind. We should go to the church next. If the town's history is tangled with this ritual, Reverend Kane would know something." They made their way up Elm Street, the steeple of the old Baptist church rising like a blackened fang against the moonlit clouds. The building was dark, but a low yellow glow leaked from the window of the rectory next door. Noah knocked gently on the door. After a moment, footsteps shuffled on the other side. The door cracked open. Reverend Kane's face emerged, lined with exhaustion. "Noah? Clara? It's late. What's happened?" "Reverend?" Clara stepped forward. "We need to ask about the fires in 1968 and the old asylum and this symbol." She handed him the photocopy. Kane's hand trembled slightly as he took the paper. His eyes scanned it, and the color drained from his face. "You shouldn't be playing with things you don't understand," he said, voice hoarse. "Where did you find this?" Noah told him everything, the asylum, the journals, the circle in Angela's basement, the recording. Kane listened in silence, his expression a mask of dread. "I thought we had buried this," he finally whispered. "I thought the pact had held." Clara stiffened. "Pact?" Reverend Kane gestured for them to enter. Inside, the living room was lit by a single floor lamp, casting long shadows over old photographs and dusty Bibles. Kane eased himself into a worn leather chair and motioned for them to sit. In 1968, there was no electrical fire. That's just what the paper said. Truth is, the asylum burned because the thing inside it was starting to wake. The patients, they were vessels. Something had begun to use them, speak through them. Our ancestors made a deal with it, or with them. I'm not even sure anymore. "What kind of deal?" Noah asked, heart pounding. "They would be left alone, allowed to live in peace, so long as the town performed the rite every 20 years. A binding ceremony. A sacrifice. Clara went pale. Are you saying we've been sacrificing people? Kane looked away. Not always people, but something precious. A fire. A disappearance. A life. It had to be meaningful. That was the cost. Noah felt his mouth go dry. And if we don't pay? They rise, Kane said simply. The sleepers wake. A gust of wind rattled the windows. Somewhere far off, a dog howled. Noah stood. Then we have to stop it. This ritual, this curse, whatever it is, we can end it. Reverend Kane's eyes were suddenly sharp. If you try, it will fight back. You've already poked it. You saw the sigil in Angela's home. That wasn't just carved for protection. That was a lock. And now you've unlocked it. Clara's voice shook. So what do we do now? The Reverend didn't answer right away. Then he turned to a nearby bookshelf and pulled a thin, black-bound book from the top shelf. He handed it to Noah. I kept this all these years, he said. The original transcript of the ritual, notes from the town's founders. It's in Latin, some of it coded, but if you truly want to stop this, you'll need to understand what you're up against. As Noah opened the book, the room seemed to contract like the walls were leaning in. The words on the first page blurred and twisted, and a whisper, not external but deep in his skull, rippled through him. You are already known to us. He gasped and nearly dropped the book. Reverend Kane paled. They've marked you. What does that mean? Clara asked, terrified. Noah didn't answer. His fingertips tingled where they'd touched the ink. The sigils weren't just symbols. They were alive in some way, writhing beneath his skin, branding him. We should leave, he said tightly. Now. The walk back to Clara's place was tense and silent. When they arrived, she locked the door behind them and pulled the curtains shut. Noah set the book on the kitchen table like it was a bomb. They flipped through it together. Sketches, instructions, warnings, pages blacked out. One passage repeated over and over. They are beneath. They remember. They will be fed. Noah's mind reeled. This thing? It's not just local folklore. It's ancient. Older than the town. Maybe older than this land. The settlers didn't bring it here. It was already waiting. Suddenly, a shrill sound pierced the room. Clara's phone buzzed violently across the table. She grabbed it. Unknown number. She answered, heart hammering. Nothing. Just static. Then, through the hiss, came a whisper. Don't look out the window. Clara's breath hitched. They turned toward the living room window, curtains closed, but behind the fabric, the faintest silhouette. A hand, pressed to the glass. Then 3 taps. The wind had died the moment Jacob stepped past the crumbled stone fence into the sunken field where the grass grew too thick and too wet. Beneath his boots, the soil gave like flesh, soft and oddly warm. Each step left a dark print behind, and with every movement, the air around him felt thicker, heavier, as if he were wading through some invisible, slow-moving tide. It was early morning, though the light suggested otherwise. A low-hanging fog had settled like a living shroud across the lower valley, and somewhere deep in that grayness stood the old Waterford estate, a decaying manor half swallowed by the woods and nearly forgotten by the town. He had seen it before from a distance, its broken turrets and collapsed roof barely visible beyond the dead treetops. But standing here now, Jacob felt as if he had stumbled into another century, into something the world had been trying to forget. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, checked the battery on his recorder, still full, and hit the red circle. The soft beep echoed in the silence like a scream. I've reached the Waterford boundary line. It's 6:38 IME fog. Density is high, visibility is poor. Smells like iron and mildew. He paused. There's something wrong with the ground. Feels like it's pulsing. The recorder clicked off. A distant creak, like wood twisting under pressure, floated through the fog. Jacob flinched, instinctively reaching for the flashlight tucked at his side. But no beam could cut this darkness. Not really. It wasn't just visual, it was emotional. Everything felt dimmed, even his thoughts. Still, he pressed forward, driven by the sense that whatever had happened to Eddie near this place hadn't been an accident. There were too many overlaps. The carvings on Eddie's arms, the strange pattern found on the back of his diary, and that name, Absalom. It had surfaced in every newspaper clipping Jacob had found about the Waterford property, buried in articles that dated back to the Civil War. A preacher, a prophet, a recluse who vanished one day, leaving behind only rumors and a church that no longer stood. The manor appeared through the fog like a corpse rising from the earth, wood warped and black with rot, windows shattered, roof caved in on one side. Ivy hung like veins across its face, and a single door hung crooked on rusted hinges, gently swinging even though there was no breeze. Jacob approached cautiously, each step a soft squelch. When he reached the porch, the wood groaned but held. Up close, the door revealed symbols etched in the frame, not English, but not unfamiliar either. Something about them crawled across his skin like static. He reached out and ran a finger across the deepest carving. It was cold, colder than the air. Inside, the manor smelled of damp stone, rotted paper, and something metallic, blood maybe. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam jittered across faded wallpaper, collapsed beams, and the black remains of what must have been furniture. Cobwebs shimmered like curtains in the half-light, and as he stepped across the threshold, he swore the air grew even thicker, syrupy almost. "Hello?" His voice cracked. Nothing answered. He moved slowly through the foyer, flashlight trembling in his grip. The wallpaper here was different. It bore patterns Jacob had seen before, in dreams maybe, or in old etchings. Loops and spirals that seemed to draw the eye inward, to a center that wasn't actually there. The kind of pattern that made your pupils tighten. The floorboards creaked underfoot, but not just from his weight. There were other sounds now, from above. A dragging sound. A thump. Then silence. He should leave, he knew that. But something deeper than curiosity pulled him further inside. Something magnetic. He crossed into a wide room, likely once a parlor. At its center sat a grand piano, half covered in mold and grime. The keys were broken, yet one note played faintly as he entered. A low C, humming like a warning. He didn't touch it. The sound came again. Above. Deliberate now. Jacob found the stairwell collapsed, but a narrow servant's passage had survived, hidden behind a door near the kitchen. As he squeezed through, he found his breath growing short, chest tightening. It wasn't just dust. It was the pressure. The same pressure you feel before a thunderstorm, only without the lightning to release it. The second floor was in worse shape. Most of the floorboards were missing, exposing skeletal beams and a black void beneath. But one hallway remained intact. Barely. He edged forward, each step groaning, his flashlight revealing a trail of symbols, scrawled in what looked like charcoal or dried blood. The further he went, the more complex they became, and they all spiraled toward the final door at the end of the hall. Tall, sealed tight, covered in handprints. Jacob stared at it. He didn't want to open it, but he had come this far. He reached out and pushed. The door groaned and gave way, revealing a study drenched in shadow. The air was ice. Shelves lined the walls, filled with rotting books and jars of unidentifiable contents. The desk at the center had been carved with the same symbols from outside, and pinned to the wall behind it, dozens of photographs. Black and white, sepia, color, all different eras, all different people, and every one of them had their eyes burned out. Jacob staggered backward, heart pounding. That's when he saw it, scratched into the floor beneath the desk. A spiral. No, the spiral. The one from Eddie's skin, from the forest, from the dream. As he stepped closer, he noticed something pulsing within it, something beneath it. The wood flexed, shifted, and then the whispering started, low, like breath through leaves. Dozens of voices layered atop each other, too fast to understand, but not too fast to fear. He bent down, recorder trembling in his hand. There's There's a pattern under the desk, the same as... The floor shattered beneath him. Jacob fell, screaming into darkness, spiraling down through the house like water circling a drain. And the last thing he saw before the black swallowed him whole was something moving below, something waiting. Jacob hit the ground hard, the cold earth scraping his cheek as darkness swallowed him whole. His breath came in ragged gasps, the taste of damp dirt thick on his tongue. For a moment, he lay still, disoriented, listening. The silence around him was so complete, it roared in his ears. Then came the faintest sound, a soft scraping, like fingernails tracing wood, echoing from somewhere below. His heart pounded violently in his chest, each beat a hammer blow. As he scrambled to his hands and knees, the shadows around him felt alive, shifting and writhing as if the darkness itself was breathing. He groped blindly, hands seeking something solid, and found cold stone beneath a thin layer of soil. Pulling himself upright, Jacob realized he had fallen into a hidden cellar, long forgotten and buried beneath the ruins of the Waterford manor. Faint beams of morning light leaked in through cracks above, casting fractured patterns on the damp walls. But the cellar was far from empty. Strange symbols, crudely etched into the stone, crawled along every surface, twisting spirals and jagged lines that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Jacob swallowed hard and forced himself to stand. His legs trembled, but he had no choice. There was something here, something waiting, something tied to the spiral. The same spiral Eddie had drawn repeatedly, the same spiral scrawled in the woods. He pulled the flashlight from his bag and clicked it on, the narrow beam slicing through the gloom. The cellar stretched before him, a maze of broken furniture, shattered glass, and overturned crates. But something deeper pulled at his attention. At the far end of the room, half buried beneath rotting boards, he spotted a rusted metal door, its surface corroded but still intact. Chains wrapped around the handle were old and brittle, but they hadn't fully severed. Whatever lay beyond was meant to be locked away. Jacob's hands shook as he reached for the chains, pulling them free with a wet crackle. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage descending further into the earth. A chill breeze emerged, carrying with it a faint, sickly sweet odor, like decaying flowers and iron. He hesitated. The air was thick with dread, and the voices from the floor above still echoed in his mind, but he had to know. He had to find the truth, no matter the cost. Step by slow step, Jacob descended into the darkness. The passage opened into a cavernous chamber, walls dripping with moisture, covered in more of the cryptic symbols that seemed to pulse beneath his gaze. A faint glow emanated from a shallow pool at the center, its water black as ink, rippling unnaturally despite the still air. He moved closer, flashlight beam reflecting off the surface, revealing something embedded beneath. The faint outline of a submerged figure, tangled in long strands of kelp-like roots that seemed to writhe slowly. Jacob swallowed hard, the cold sweat prickling at his temples. He felt eyes on him, not human, but ancient, watching. From the shadows, a sound stirred, a low, guttural chant. It rose gradually, weaving into a haunting melody that filled the chamber. The temperature dropped sharply, his breath misting before him in thick clouds. Jacob's skin crawled as the air vibrated with a dreadful power. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, pulsing with every note of the chant. The pool began to churn, black water frothing like a storm at sea. A figure emerged. At first it was a silhouette, tall and gaunt, limbs elongated and unnatural. Its eyes glowed faintly with an eerie green light. As it stepped into the glow, Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The thing was neither fully human nor beast. Its skin was pale and stretched tight, mottled with patches of what looked like barnacles or scales. Long tendrils hung from its arms and chin, moving gently, as if under water. Jacob stumbled back, heart hammering. The chanting rose, surrounding him, wrapping tight like a noose. "I know what you seek," the creature whispered, voice like the rush of cold tides. "But some truths drown the soul." Jacob clenched his fists. "I'm here for Eddie." The creature's gaze flickered with something almost like sorrow. "Eddie is lost, consumed by the spiral. The curse is older than this land, older than the blood spilled here. It stepped closer, each movement fluid, terrifying. "You've touched what was never meant to be disturbed," it said. "The ritual binds all who enter, living or dead. The land itself remembers." Jacob's mind raced. The spiral, the carvings, the drowning sensation Eddie described before he vanished. It all made sick sense now. Something beneath the soil was alive, watching, hungry. "Can it be stopped?" Jacob asked, voice barely above a whisper. The creature cocked its head. "To stop the curse, one must become the curse." Before Jacob could react, a violent tremor shook the chamber. Dust and stones rained from the ceiling, and the black water roared, surging like a living thing. The creature vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a chill that sank deep into Jacob's bones. He turned to flee, heart pounding, lungs burning, but the passage behind him had collapsed. There was no way back. Panic clawed at his throat as he scanned the chamber, seeking any other exit. The symbols on the walls pulsed violently now, throbbing with an otherworldly rhythm. From the depths of the pool, something began to rise. A mass of twisting limbs and glistening scales, dripping with the foul water. The creature Jacob had glimpsed was just the beginning. As the first of the appendages reached the chamber floor, Jacob backed into a corner, trapped and gasping for breath. The chanting grew louder, now a chorus echoing inside his mind, drowning out his thoughts. He closed his eyes, willing the nightmare to end. When he opened them again, the chamber was empty. Only the ripples on the black water remained, slowly settling back into stillness. Jacob sank to his knees, trembling, overwhelmed by the knowledge that the curse was real and that it was far from finished. But somewhere deep beneath the manor, in the heart of the spiral, something stirred again. The night was suffocating, thick with the scent of pine and decay. Jacob sat hunched beside the cold fireplace in the dilapidated sheriff's office, the only warmth a flicker of dying embers. Outside, the wind howled through the skeletal trees, whispering secrets better left forgotten. Somewhere in the distance, a lone owl called out, a mournful cry that seemed to pierce the veil between the living and the dead. Jacob's eyes were bloodshot, gaze fixed on the weathered map spread across the scarred wooden table. The faded lines traced the winding roads of Waterford and the surrounding hills, his only guide through this maze of horror. But the map told only part of the story. The true labyrinth lay beneath, tangled in ancient rituals and cursed bloodlines. He rubbed his temples, trying to piece together the fragments of what he'd uncovered. Eddie's last words echoed relentlessly. "The spiral never ends." Those cryptic phrases, the twisted symbols carved in the cellar, the black water, it all pointed to something far older and darker than a simple ghost story. Jacob was no stranger to small-town superstitions, but Waterford's curse was a living nightmare. He recalled the sheriff's grim warning, "Don't dig too deep, Jacob. Some things don't want to be found." Yet here he was, more determined than ever to unravel the truth, no matter what it cost. The door creaked open, and Marlene stepped inside, her eyes sharp and wary. "You've been at this for hours," she said, voice low. "You look like hell." Jacob forced a weary smile. "I can't stop now. There's too much at stake." Marlene nodded, pulling up a chair. She was the town's historian, a woman whose knowledge of Waterford's dark past was unmatched. But even she seemed shaken, her usual composure replaced by a shadow of fear. "Tell me what you found," she urged. Jacob recounted his descent into the cellar. The symbols, the black pool, and the creature that vanished into the darkness. He described the chanting, the surge of ancient power, and the crushing realization that the curse was far more complex than any legend. Marlene listened intently, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "The spiral is more than a symbol," she said finally. "It's a ritual, a cycle of sacrifice and rebirth that binds this land. The original settlers made a pact with forces they barely understood, and now, generations later, the price is paid in blood." Jacob leaned in. "Do you know how to stop it?" Her eyes darkened. "The ritual can't be undone, but it can be redirected. There's a way to contain it, to break the cycle for a time." Hope flickered in Jacob's chest, fragile but real. "What do I have to do?" Marlene hesitated. "You'll need to find the altar, the heart of the spiral. It's hidden deep in the forest, in the ruins of the old chapel. But be warned, the curse doesn't take kindly to intruders. Many have tried, none have returned." Jacob nodded, steeling himself. "Then that's where I'm going." As Marlene packed a small bag with supplies, Jacob's thoughts drifted to the others. Eddie, lost to the spiral. Sheriff Blake, whose warnings had gone unheeded. And the countless souls trapped in Waterford's shadow. He couldn't let their fates be sealed by fear. The journey into the forest began just as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. Mist clung to the ground, swirling around gnarled roots and ancient stones. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches twisted and bare, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for him. Jacob moved cautiously, each step crunching softly on the leaf-strewn path. The air was heavy with a strange energy, prickling his skin and setting his nerves on edge. He could feel the spiral's presence growing stronger, a pulse beneath the earth that quickened with every step. Hours passed, the forest thickening until the ruins appeared, an outline of a forgotten chapel swallowed by ivy and time. Stone walls crumbled, stained with moss and dark streaks that looked like dried blood. Jacob approached the altar, a slab of rough-hewn granite carved with the spiral symbol at its center. Around it, scattered bones and remnants of burnt offerings told a grim story of those who had come before. He knelt, running his fingers over the cold stone. The symbols glowed faintly, resonating with a power that made his teeth chatter. Suddenly, a whisper slithered through the air, soft and malevolent. Jacob's head snapped up as shadows shifted among the ruins. A figure emerged, cloaked and indistinct, eyes burning like coals. "You should not have come," the voice hissed. Jacob drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of the curse pressing down. "I'm here to end this." The figure laughed, a sound that echoed like cracking ice. "End? The spiral is eternal. To break it, one must pay the ultimate price." Jacob's heart thundered. "Then, I'm ready." The shadow moved closer, tendrils of darkness curling around the altar. Jacob could feel the air crackling with ancient magic, the ground trembling beneath him. As the ritual began, Jacob's mind flooded with visions, twisted faces, endless spirals, cries of agony and despair stretching back centuries. The curse was alive, feeding on pain and sacrifice, entwined with the very soil. Sweat dripped down his brow, breath shallow as the chanting grew louder in his ears. He grasped the edge of the altar, grounding himself against the tide of darkness. Then, with a blinding flash, the world exploded into silence. Jacob collapsed, heart pounding, eyes wide open in the dim light of the forest clearing. He had survived, but the spiral had marked him. Jacob's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed himself to his feet, the cold dawn light filtering weakly through the skeletal branches overhead. His body trembled, not just from exhaustion, but from a deeper, primal fear that had taken root in his bones. The spiral's mark burned faintly on his palm, a searing reminder that the curse had not just touched the land, it had touched him. The forest around the ruined chapel seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, the shadows flickering unnaturally despite the rising sun. Jacob's eyes darted through the gloom, searching for any sign of movement, any hint that the shadow figure might return. But all was silent, save for the whispering wind and the distant caw of a crow. He knew better than to linger. The altar's power was a beacon for something darker, something ancient that still roamed these woods. He had to get back to Marlene, to share what he'd seen and prepare for the next step. Yet, as he turned to retrace his steps, the ground beneath him gave way. Jacob's world plunged into darkness. He awoke in a cold sweat, the sensation of wet earth pressing against his face. Groaning, he forced open his eyes to find himself lying in a shallow pit, crudely dug with jagged roots hanging overhead like claws. The air was thick and damp, filled with the scent of mold and decay. Panic surged through him. Whoever had put him here wanted to keep him quiet. But why? And how long had he been unconscious? Struggling to rise, Jacob's hand brushed something cold and metallic in the dirt. He fumbled it out, a rusted key, encrusted with dirt but unmistakably shaped for an old lock. Not just a curse, he muttered, voice hoarse. Someone's behind this. As he scanned the pit's rough walls, he spotted a narrow tunnel barely wide enough to crawl through, disappearing into deeper darkness. No other way out. He swallowed hard and began to crawl forward, heart pounding in his chest. The tunnel wound deeper beneath the forest floor, its walls slick with moisture and the faint echo of dripping water. Jacob's fingers scraped the rough stone, searching for purchase. Each breath he took felt heavier, as if the air itself was poisoned. Suddenly, the passage opened into a vast underground chamber. Faint torchlight flickered along the walls, casting grotesque shadows over a room filled with remnants of a long-forgotten cult. Broken idols, shattered pottery, and tattered banners embroidered with the spiral symbol. In the center stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested a leather-bound tome, its pages yellowed and curling. Jacob approached cautiously, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. He opened the book, revealing cryptic writings and diagrams of the spiral ritual. The text spoke of sacrifices to ancient gods, promises of power and protection in exchange for blood, and a warning. The cycle feeds until the debt is paid in full. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages, until a sudden noise stopped him cold. A slow, deliberate clap, echoing from the chamber's shadowed corners. From the darkness stepped the figure, the same cloaked shadow from the chapel, eyes glowing with a cold fire. "You've read the truth," it said, voice like grinding stone. "But knowledge is a double-edged blade, Jacob. It cuts both the ignorant and the wise." Jacob's heart pounded fiercely, but he forced himself to stand tall. "Why me? Why mark me with this curse?" The figure moved closer, revealing a gaunt face, pale and cracked like old porcelain. "Because you have a choice. You can continue the cycle, or break it by becoming the next guardian of the spiral." Jacob's blood ran cold. What does that mean? To contain the curse, to protect the living, one must bear the burden. The guardian holds the spiral's power, but is bound forever, trapped between worlds. A sudden wave of visions crashed over Jacob, endless spirals twisting into infinity, faces screaming in torment, and the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He staggered, gripping the pedestal for support. "Choose wisely," the figure whispered, fading into the shadows as the torchlight flickered and died. Jacob was left alone in the suffocating darkness, the book's pages fluttering in an unseen breeze. The spiral symbol seemed to glow faintly on the pedestal, pulsing like a heartbeat. His mind raced. To become the guardian was to accept eternal torment, isolation, and a fate worse than death. But to refuse meant the curse would continue to consume Waterford, claiming more innocent lives. The choice was unbearable. As he gathered the book and prepared to escape the chamber, a sudden tremor shook the earth. Dust rained from the ceiling, and distant, agonized wails echoed through the tunnels. Jacob's eyes widened in horror. The spiral was awakening, its hunger growing. He sprinted through the tunnel, the walls closing in, his breath ragged. The forest outside was no longer welcoming. It felt hostile, alive with unseen eyes tracking his every move. Reaching the surface, Jacob gasped for air, heart hammering in his chest. Marlene was waiting, anxiety etched into her features. "What happened?" she asked urgently. Jacob showed her the book, his voice low and grim. "The curse. It's worse than we thought, and it's coming for us." Before they could speak further, the ground beneath them trembled violently, a deep rumble rolling through the trees. From the darkness between the trunks, pale figures emerged, twisted remnants of past victims, their hollow eyes burning with fury. Jacob and Marlene exchanged a terrified glance. The spiral was no longer content to stay buried. They had little time left. The cold air in Waterford carried a weight heavier than winter's chill, pressing down on Jacob and Marlene as they stood at the edge of the forest. The flickering lights of the cursed town dim behind them. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the silence was broken only by the distant, mournful cries echoing through the trees, ghostly remnants of those who had fallen victim to the spiral's endless hunger. Jacob tightened his grip on the leather-bound tome, its worn pages now a grim roadmap to the fate awaiting them. He could feel the pulse of the curse beneath his skin, a rhythm matching the rapid beating of his heart. The choice lay before him, sharper than any blade. Accept the unbearable mantle of the Guardian, or let the spiral's darkness consume everything he loved. Marlene's eyes searched his face, reflecting a mixture of fear and fierce determination. "We can't let it spread," she whispered. "Whatever it takes, we stop this tonight." Together, they stepped into the heart of Waterford, where crumbling buildings bore silent witness to the town's forgotten horrors. The once lively streets were choked by creeping vines, the air thick with the scent of decay. Jacob's footsteps echoed hollowly, each one a reminder of the lives lost and the time slipping away. As they moved deeper, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavier, charged with an unseen menace. Shapes flickered at the edge of vision, whispers of the past, or something far more sinister. Marlene clutched Jacob's arm, her voice barely audible. "Stay close, it's watching." Ahead, the old town square awaited, dominated by the shattered remnants of the statue that had once symbolized hope. Now it was a twisted monument to despair, its cracked surface crawling with the spiral symbol that bound the curse. Jacob opened the tome, his fingers tracing the faded text. The final ritual awaited, one that would demand a sacrifice greater than either could imagine. The words spoke of binding the spiral, sealing its hunger with the Guardian's eternal vigil. A chill ran down Jacob's spine. "If I take this on," he said, voice steady despite the fear, "I won't just protect Waterford. I'll be trapped here, part of the curse itself." Marlene nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then we make sure you don't face it alone." As twilight descended, the ground trembled beneath their feet. From the shadows emerged the hollow-eyed figures, those caught between worlds, lost souls bound to the spiral's will. Their mournful cries swelled into a haunting chorus, filling the square with an unbearable sorrow. Jacob raised the tome, chanting the ancient words that pulsed with forgotten power. The spiral on the statue glowed, responding to his voice, twisting and writhing like a living thing. The ghosts reached out, their hands desperate for release, their faces etched with pain and hope. Energy surged through Jacob, burning and binding him in equal measure. His vision blurred as the spiral's power coursed within, a dark tether pulling him between life and oblivion. Marlene stood firm, holding his hand, grounding him to the world beyond the curse. "You're stronger than it," she said. "Hold on." The ritual climaxed. In a blinding flash, the spiral symbol searing into Jacob's flesh, a permanent mark of the Guardian. The ghosts slowly faded, their cries silenced as peace settled over Waterford for the first time in decades. But as the light dimmed, a cold voice whispered through the night air, a warning and a promise. The spiral was contained, but never destroyed. Jacob's sacrifice had bought time, but the curse's hunger would awaken again, ready to claim another guardian. The forest seemed to breathe, alive with secrets yet to be revealed. Jacob looked to Marlene, his eyes heavy but resolute. This isn't the end. It's only the beginning. And somewhere deep in the shadows, a new spiral began to form. The air hung thick with a sinister stillness as Jacob's body stood rooted by the ancient spiral's mark, its burning imprint now a permanent scar on his skin. Marlene's fingers trembled as she gripped his hand, grounding him to reality while the shadows whispered their eerie lullaby around them. The forest seemed to pulse with a life of its own, every rustle of leaves and distant howl echoing the restless hunger that had plagued water for generations. Jacob's breath hitched, the weight of his new role pressing down harder than the chill in the air. He was no longer just a man. He was the vessel, the eternal guardian of a curse too dark to fully comprehend. The knowledge seeped into his mind like poison, fragments of rituals and old incantations weaving themselves into his consciousness against his will. Every beat of his heart was a battle between the remnants of his humanity and the creeping darkness that threatened to consume him whole. Marlene's voice broke through the oppressive silence, firm and resolute. "We have to make a choice, Jacob. The spiral's hunger never sleeps. It will come back, stronger, if it finds a crack in the seal." Jacob nodded slowly, the resolve in his eyes flickering like a dying flame refusing to go out. "I'll carry it, but it means I'm trapped here, watching, waiting, forever." His words hung in the air, heavy with sacrifice. A sudden rustling drew their attention, a figure emerging from the shadows, eyes glinting with a cold, unnatural light. It was the sheriff, weathered and wary, yet holding a strength that came from years of protecting this cursed town. "You did what you had to do," he said gruffly, "but don't think this ends it. The spiral feeds on fear and despair. It's patient." Marlene stepped forward, defiance sparking in her gaze. "Then we make sure it starves." The sheriff nodded, reaching into his coat pocket to reveal a bundle of weathered papers and an old locket. "This is the town's history. The stories no one wanted to believe, the rituals, the sacrifices, the names of those who came before. You'll need them." Jacob took the items, feeling the weight of generations pressing upon him. The spiral wasn't just a curse, it was a legacy, tangled in the roots of Waterford itself. As they turned to leave the square, a sudden chill swept through the air. The forest's edge seemed to ripple, shadows bending and twisting unnaturally. From the darkness emerged a whispering voice, barely audible but laden with menace. "The Guardian's bond is forged, but the spiral remembers." Jacob's heart pounded as the shadows around them coalesced into a twisted shape, a grotesque figure, half human, half spiral, eyes burning with malevolent intelligence. It was the cursed entity itself, drawn forth by the ritual's completion, hungering to reclaim its dominion. Marlene raised a makeshift talisman, its faint glow pushing back the darkness, but the entity advanced relentlessly. Jacob, feeling the spiral's power surge within, stepped forward, the mark on his skin flaring with light. A battle of wills ignited, a desperate struggle between the Guardian's resolve and the entity's insatiable hunger. In the chaos, Marlene was thrown back, crashing against a broken fence, her vision blurring. Jacob's voice pierced the darkness, commanding and fierce. "You won't take this town, not while I stand." With a final surge of strength, Jacob channeled the spiral's power, binding the entity in chains of light and shadow. The creature howled in rage, dissolving into the night, but the victory was fleeting. As dawn broke over Waterford, the town lay eerily quiet. Too quiet. Jacob and Marlene stood at the edge of the forest, battered but unbroken. Yet beneath the surface, a new tremor stirred, a reminder that the spiral's curse was far from over. Jacob turned to Marlene, voice heavy with unspoken fears. "This fight is never truly won. The spiral will hunger again, and next time it will be stronger." From the depths of the forest, an unholy silence whispered a chilling truth. Waterford was not merely a place, but a prison, and its walls were closing in tighter than ever. The darkness hadn't just been held at bay, it was waiting, patient, inevitable, and hungry. Thank you so much for joining me on this chilling journey through Waterford's darkest secrets. I hope this story sent a few shivers down your spine and kept you on the edge of your seat. If you enjoyed this tale of curses, rituals, and the thin line between reality and nightmare, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our future horror stories. Feel free to share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. I love hearing what you think and what creeps you out the most. Remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't just in stories. They might be lurking just beyond the edge of the woods, waiting for you. Stay safe, stay curious, and keep your eyes open. Until next time, sleep tight if you can.